Hey guys, my name is Liel Bergoffen and I am a junior GFA major. I'm here today to introduce George Ferrandi, a multimedia artist from our very own Baltimore, Maryland. Ferrandi received her BFA in sculpture from Virginia Commonwealth University, her MFA from Ohio State University, and attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. She's currently based in Brooklyn, New York. She's the founder of Wayfarers, a nonprofit studio space and gallery in Bushwick, open from 2011 to 2020, and an active leader and collaborator in performances and installations across the United States today. The variety of Ferrandi's work knows no bounds, ranging in medium from colored pencil to large-scale sculpture to a monthly curio subscription service that spanned the early days of the pandemic. Her work underscores the multidisciplinary spirit of GFA. Her work is humorous, tapping into the quiet and uncertain parts of the human experience and creating pieces that are humbly relatable and full of whimsy. Please join me in welcoming to the stage George Ferrandi.
Thank you, Liel, for that lovely intro. I'm going to take a quick picture of you guys. Everybody smile. Okay. I like to announce that I'm a little nervous so that I'm not nervous about pretending to not be nervous. And I'm going to show you essentially a survey of my work over the last several decades, and most of it will be chronological, but I'm going to start with this piece that is really pretty recent because it was filmed here in Baltimore. Folks in the back, if I talk this loud, can you hear me okay? Awesome. Okay, thank you. Ready?
Yes.
This world.
This world.
This world.
This world.
Say it like it's the title of something, Mom.
This world.
I would like to write a poem.
I would like to write a poem
About the world.
About the world.
That has in it nothing fancy.
It has nothing in it, nothing in it fancy.
That has in it nothing fancy.
It has nothing in it fancy.
That has in it nothing fancy.
It has nothing in it fancy.
That has in it
It has in it
nothing
fancy.
fancy. That has in it
It has in it
nothing fancy.
nothing fancy.
I would like to write a poem
I would like to write a poem
about the world
about the world
that has in it nothing fancy.
nothing fancy.
But it seems impossible.
But it seems impossible.
Whatever the subject,
Whatever the subject,
the morning sun glimmers it.
the morning sun glimmers it.
The tulip feels the heat
The tulips feel the heat
and flaps its petals open
and flaps its petals open
and becomes a star.
and becomes a star.
It's boar with a B
Okay,
and one peony bud.
war,
Right.
penis bud, peony's bud,
Peony,
peony's,
one peony, peony bud.
peony bud.
Right. The ants bore into the peony bud.
The ants pour into the peony's bud.
Bore.
Wart.
The
Okay.
ants bore into the one peony bud.
Okay.
Okay. The ants bore into the peony bud.
The ants pour into the peony bud.
Bore.
Wart.
The ants bore into the peony bud.
The ants bore into the peony bud.
And there is the dark pinprick well of sweetness.
And there is a dark pinprick, a well of sweetness.
As for the stones on the beach,
As for the stones on the beach,
forget it.
forget it.
Let's do that one again. As for the stones on the beach, forget it.
As for the stones on the beach, forget it.
Each one could be set in gold.
Each one could be set in gold.
So I tried with my eyes shut.
So I tried with my eyes shut. But of course, the birds were singing.
And the aspen trees were shaking the sweetest music out of their leaves.
And the aspen trees were singing the sweetest music out of their leaves.
Shaking, not singing. And the aspen trees were shaking the sweetest music out of their leaves.
The aspen trees were shaking the sweetest music out of their leaves.
And that was followed by...
And that was followed by...
Guess what?
Guess what?
A momentous and beautiful silence.
A memento of beautiful silence.
A momentous...
A
momentous...
A momentous...
Momentous...
A momentous... I can't say...
Momentous...
Okay, you're saying... Don't make me laugh. A momentous...
Momentous...
Okay, George, it won't come.
Mo...
A momentous.
That's it.
Okay.
A momentous...
Momentous...
and beautiful silence.
A beautiful silence.
As comes to all of us.
Has come to all of us
In little earfuls.
in little earfuls,
If we're not too hurried to hear it.
if we're not too hurried to hear it. As for spiders, how the dew hangs in their web, even if they say nothing, and seem to say nothing, and seem to say nothing, or seem to say nothing. So fancy is the world. Who knows? Maybe they sing. So fancy is the world. Who knows? Maybe the stars sing too. And the ants, and the peonies, and the warm stones. So happy to be where they are, on the beach, instead of being locked up in gold.
Thank you. I will pass those applause on to my mom. She's really glad this is being recorded, and she just turned 92. And now I'm going to go back, flash back to when I was closer to probably most of your development and where you are in your art-making trajectory. This was the summer between my first and second year of graduate school at Ohio State. I was at Skowhegan, and I gave myself the assignment of making 3 sculptures every morning before lunch. And my limitations were I was only going to use materials that I had readily available: rose petals, masking tape, tissue paper, and straight pins. And over the course of the summer, I developed what felt like a kind of visual vocabulary. And I learned a lot from this project. I'm still figuring out how to apply what I learned, but one of the things I learned is that the first piece in the morning would be really kind of overworked, and then the second piece would have a inventiveness about it that felt light, and then the third piece would almost always be like trying to get whatever the second piece had. Yeah, I think there's something about, I'm not sure how to apply that yet. But over the course of the summer, it really, my sensibility with this material pared down. And where the first pieces were dense and I felt like I had to use all of the material options, by the end of the summer, it was much more minimal and ephemeral. And when I got to this tall piece on the tall piece, I put my fingers in those holes and it held its rigidity as a bird. And it was just such a relief that you could make art with so little. And I really think it kind of cleared a space for me to make this piece that summer. I secretly welded this structure every night, and then towards the end of the residency, some friends helped me steal this raft that was already there, and we paddled it to another side of the lake and erected this structure and then straight pinned the fabric to it. And then we planned to just paddle it back, but we hadn't realized that we'd essentially built a box kite, and so we had no control over it. And the wind took us to another part of the lake, and we had no food or sunscreen or water. But eventually, this mom and her 2 kids in a boat saved us and put their anchor on our boat and towed us back. And this piece was really formative for me because it was so many things at once. Like, the primary thing is I thought I was making a symbol for something in this residency with all of these people and no privacy. I thought I was making a symbol for privacy, among other things. But then it turned out to be the thing itself in a lot of ways. So people would put their sleeping bags into trash bags and swim out and sleep there overnight. Or Mel Chin, who was a faculty member at the time, would he put his plate of dinner on a raft and floated out and ate dinner alone in the house. And so something about it being the symbol and the thing itself became really important, as well as wanting art to like be a secret and a heist and an adventure and a rescue mission and a way to like build meaningful relationships. Suddenly my bar for art making wanted to include all of those things. And I think the next time I really successfully did that was in this collaborative project that I started while I was at the University of Florida teaching. And essentially, I worked with about 11 other artists that I invited to collaborate with me, and we started a traveling circus that we bought a flatbed and built very cheaply at like a yard sale, and we built this trailer that folded out into a stage, and we rented a truck that was much nicer than anything any of us drove, and we did this 2-hour show. It was a 3-hour setup. We brought our own seating and speakers, and then did this 2-hour live performance and then a 3-hour breakdown, and we'd drive to the next place where we'd arranged to do the show, and sleeping on people's floors along the way. And it was pre-internet, so all of that was a whole elaborate process that involved mailing VHS tapes to venues that we'd found in the yellow pages. It was all very labor intensive. And the show itself was, we either were referencing historical circus acts or actual circus performers, but using them as a way to address more contemporary issues or ideas. This one, for example, this is me and John Orth on the roof, and I was playing a ukulele pretty badly and then removed the face of my dress and revealed a second set of legs that were tap dancing to the ukulele. And this was a direct homage to an actual sideshow performer, Josephine Myrtle Corbin, who was born with 2 lower bodies and was really a remarkable person and performer. I'm not exactly sure what I want to say about this. We're like fixing a leak on the roof, and Mindy is holding my butt because there's no way for me to get enough leverage with the drill. But I like this slide to remind me that although this project was 25 or so years ago, all of those people are still the ones closest to me. And just some kind of mental note that recognizes how profound the relationships that happen when you're making art together, especially if you're making something spectacular that no one really knew they needed, how deep those relationships can be. This is a portrait of us taken by Leonard Knight, and he's the person who made this spectacular mountain. He literally painted it with latex paint. So quick shout out to Jesse, James Arnold, David Scout McQueen, John Orth, Alan Cowpey, Mindy Abovitz, and Christy Gass, all who are artists in their own right and doing really interesting things now. This is not a piece by me. This is by Jackie Windsor. Jackie Windsor was a minimalist. I think that's a Donald Judd in the background. And this piece is like plywood and plaster and glass and plywood, and then those square holes in the middle were where she tied the chain to the back of her fender and dragged it around with her car and then put it in the gallery. And I love this object so much because it embedded in its surface is its own history. Like, it's a genuine patina. It has a story, and it shares with us the witnessing of that story. And in some ways, I wonder if that's not what the circus was about, was a way to create a genuine patina for those objects and an actual story, and to have them bear witness to their own history in some way. And this, I love this as kind of an artifact of the circus and maybe of my personal philosophy. We'd built this rolling machine that left a residue of sawdust and glitter, but it kept breaking. The axle kept breaking. We kept welding it. It kept breaking. The only thing that worked was the vice grip because it let it have a little bit of flexibility. And so then we tried to like camouflage the vice grip in a wooden box. And then we realized we just need to celebrate the vice grip and glitter it up and own that sometimes our mistakes are our signatures, and sometimes the repair is more interesting than the original plan. And I'm trying to live that. So the circus happened for a few years where all of our lives could kind of accommodate its instability. And then I moved to Brooklyn, and I had a lot of plans for what I was going to do, but I got there the day before 9/11. And so a lot of my plans didn't make sense anymore. But one thing that I was thinking about, and it felt like culturally we were thinking about, was repair and restoration. And so I started this business that restored statues of saints for churches. My family actually had a church restoration business here in Baltimore where they focused on the structural stuff, like repairing the steeples, not the decorative work. So I had some familiarity with the whole like backstage vibe of churches. And sometimes it was just touch-ups, minor plaster repairs. Sometimes it would be making Jesus' skin tone more reflective of the congregation. Sometimes it was a complete redo. This was a St. Paulinus reliquary, so that little glass circle in the middle houses some bit of fabric that maybe actually touched the human being that was Paulinus. And it had been in a basement for a long time. It's actually paper mache. It was very waterlogged. And this damage in the front was actually not caused by the storage, but was early on in its fabrication. And so I'm left to understand that it was stored in a display cabinet at some point, but the display cabinet was a little too small, so they literally cut the corner on the Bible to make it fit. And in pulling, to do the repair, like I had to remove a lot of the damaged material, and in removing the damage to the Bible, I realized they used an actual book. And then upon closer examination, saw this like X with a circle and thought it was some sort of Masonic symbol, and then realized it's a guidebook to knitting, which just cannot be more perfect. I really, those statues were used in places like Philly and maybe areas of Baltimore, maybe in Little Italy, in Brooklyn. Those statues are often used annually in a procession. And I'm still so jealous of this, that people kind of claim the public street and they are connected by this narrative and they all know the songs and they're using a sculpture as their rallying point. Like, I want to do that. And I was given the opportunity to do that in Philadelphia at the Fleisher Art Memorial. And we, through these door hangers, invited folks all around Fleischer to come and share their stories with me. We put these on doors along what would eventually be a kind of parade route and all of the surrounding area. And share their stories with me over tea. And I would ask them a few very focused questions that I thought allowed for expansive stories. And while I was talking to them, I would do this sketch on a template, and then we would translate elements of their stories into sculptural objects, all of which folded under the larger story of this fictional character named Huberta. And Huberta was trying to make her way back from Florida to Coney Island and had adventures along the way. And we worked with lots of volunteers. And the premise was, if you're standing on a corner in South Philly as this procession walked by, through the light boxes that each held one word and the sculptural objects and the songs we'd written, you'd understand Huberta's story. We held a bunch of lantern-making festivals to share the narrative, and these objects are mostly made out of papier-mâché, sometimes cast over forms like a traditional South Philly boat, sometimes inflatable forms like those ducks in the bottom, and sometimes over a kind of woven reed, like the large bear named Cellulite. This is the kind of cohabitation of my lives intersecting in my Brooklyn studio window. And I have two nephews who live in Baltimore, and even though Philly is so close and that event promised to be so awesome, they didn't come because instead they went to a bar mitzvah, which now, after seeing these photos, I realized was a much better choice. And so a couple weeks after that event, these images started showing up on my Facebook feed. And most of them were just kind of like blurry or dark party shots. But this one just stopped me in my tracks. I became obsessed with it. I made it my screensaver. I rephotographed it. I was like drawing it, zooming in. It's like a Tintoretto painting, right? It's so beautiful. And where is that girl in space, that person in the black dress? How is that happening? So I honestly was obsessed with it and decided I wanted to recreate it like a historical reenactment. So the University of Alabama invited me to do a project, and I, with students and faculty and community members, built structural supports to hold them in the position of whichever character they felt most connected to. And there were a lot of rules, so we couldn't just like paint a pattern or use wires to hold things up. We had to build a structure to simulate the gravity-defying moment. The person on the left is my nephew, Julian, and the person on the right is a student, Jacob. And Jacob just could not make his smile, that his mouth just was not capable of that, so we built him a little fake mouth. And then he's got a headband with the disco balls. There was a live event where we recreated this, but zoomed in on little moments that seemed like opportunities for vignettes. So this, how do you not think of a little bunny hand puppet? And so in the live event, 2 faculty members who were playing those 2 characters had this tender little puppet show with her sleeve. And again, the pattern on the dress was made by supporting a pattern in front of the outfit so that in one perspective, it would all kind of come together clunkily and badly, recognizing that's probably what would be most interesting about using a 4D event to recreate a Facebook image of a 3D thing, that the disconnect would be where the art was. These are some of the structures. I wanted all the structures to have a sense of urgency, like kids were building it. And so we used all thrift store finds, crutches and racquetball nets, and to make everybody's hair blowing, there were blow dryers. And there was a point where, so the stage was empty and people, little clusters of the performers wheeled their structures onto the stage and had their vignette moments. And then the lights went dark and someone yelled Mazel Tov. And when the lights came up, the projected image of the original photo was there and everyone was holding their simulation photo. They did pretty good. And this is an exhibition of the structures. I think of them as prosthetics. The show was called The Prosthetics of Joy. The whole project was called The Prosthetics of Joy. I'm not going to talk too much about this. There's a lot about this on the internet, including a TED Talk. But I like it as sort of a shift in scale in relation to some of the other work. So I'll just briefly tell you about this recurring performance I did. It felt more like a kind of mediation of sorts than a performance, but I would ride the subway at night, and whoever sat next to me, I would focus on the space between us and think of it as a sculptural material made of fear and limited time and social norms and loneliness. And then I would, in my mind, try to re-sculpt it. And when it felt like, okay, we're not strangers, I know this person, I love this person, I changed the shape of the space from the space between strangers to the space between people who love each other, then I would rest my head on their shoulder and see what happened. I just love how symmetrical we are. And there were a range of actions, and times it was really beautiful. This person just let me stay until he said, Miss, this is my stop. And if there was any opportunity for interaction, I would say it felt like I knew you, which was totally true in that moment, and the name of the piece. And I feel I have very complex feelings about it now in light of the pandemic and in my understanding of my own privilege. And if you want to talk about it more at the Q&A, I would love to unpack it. I just feel like it could be a whole conversation in itself. Around the same time of that piece, though, which was really born of one of the lonelier moments in my life, I was spending a lot of time alone in the Catskills and was for the first time ever seeing the Milky Way. Like, I grew up here, you're like maybe the moon and some streetlights, but like the Milky Way was mind-boggling. And I wanted to understand what I was seeing, so I bought this book about the stars, and in it I learned that our North Star won't always be the same star, because of a very slow wobble in the Earth's rotation, our polar axis will point to a different North Star. And that blew my mind. And then I got really excited, thinking, we make a big deal about one rotation around the sun, and we get dressed up and we put on our fancy clothes and we drink champagne and, you know, we eat grapes or black-eyed peas. It's a big deal. And so what is it going to look like when we say goodbye to this star, Polaris, that has led ships to shore for hundreds of years and led enslaved people to freedom on the Underground Railroad? Like, there are going to be dances, there's going to be songs. Who's going to write them? What if it's us? And so Jumpstar is an initiative that brings together artists and musicians and scientists and everyday people and communities to create meaningful rituals that could, in theory, be passed down through generations, so that when the next North Star rotates into position, there's already this celebration in place. And it's all named in honor of Annie Jump Cannon, who was a scientist at Harvard when women weren't really allowed to be scientists at all. And she developed our star classification system that is still applicable today. And she was deaf, so an incredibly remarkable person. And the way it works is working with communities like our climatologist for the constellate dedicated to future foods. Our climatologist would talk to folks in that area. In this area, it was in Wichita, about, well, based on climate change models, what will grow here? Because maybe we don't make our star cakes out of wheat flour because wheat won't grow. Maybe we have to use this perennial polyculture called Kernza that has 14-foot long roots, so it's more drought tolerant. And then the participants in the consulate would work with local chefs and experiment with Kernza or cricket flour or jackfruit or other ingredients that our models, our climate models, anticipate would still work in 1,000 years, which is when the next star moves into place. And for the dance constellate, local dancers would come together and create a new form based on different styles that were already meaningful in that region. And as a sculptor, I was researching the individual stars that would eventually be above our polar axis, our future North Stars. And based on how they were named and kind of imagined and the stories that were told about them in different cultures, I created a backstory and a character dossier and a visual representation, and then worked with different schools or community groups to create sculptural representations of those characters. So this is students at WSU working on Deneb. This is Deneb. And we're using a process that I was invited to research in the north of Japan called Nabuta, and it's traditional in Japanese festivals, and it involves really lightweight wire frames that are held together with string and glue, and then individually cut paper and wax resists and dyes. This is Theta Buddhis, aka Boots. This is our next North Star, Gamma Cephei, aka Ceph, sporting some Keith Haring undies. And this is these are the Indestructibles. And all of this was to culminate in a live event in Kansas, and this is in our staging tent. The night before the premiere, which was to happen outside. And the song you're going to hear is written and performed, it's performed by everyone in the room, along with Mira, who's a Brooklyn-based musician. and unfortunately, that has never been seen by anybody but the people who were there performing, because a few hours after that rehearsal, there was a tornado that destroyed all of the tents around us that were set up for, Jumpstart was going to be part of a annual music festival in Kansas. But somehow our like paper and stick structures were completely spared. So they're in storage, and I don't know where they will premiere. I don't have any doubts about their importance, though, and the ongoing importance of this project, because I feel like it's getting easier for us to imagine the apocalypse than it is for us to actually look to the future with hope. But I think that our visions for the future are the tools that will be used to build it. And so we have to sort of fight that bleakness for the benefit of future generations. And Jumpstart is a kind of prefigurative approach to imagining a livable future for our descendants and planning the party that they're definitely going to deserve. This is a partial list of everyone who's been involved in Jumpstart. And sometimes there were 150 people, and that's kind of indicative of the work I had been doing since about 2010. And then the pandemic hit. And so it wasn't safe for even two people to come together. But I still wanted to be making work that offered some kind of direct connection and the possibility of building community. And you know, Zoom has offered lots of new and exciting ways of remote connection, but you guys probably would agree that it can be pretty unsatisfying. So as Liel mentioned, I started a monthly newspaper that I sent to subscribers and through the mail. And at the same time I was starting this, my partner and I bought a house in the Susquehanna River Valley. And so after 20 years in New York, I was also kind of processing this new landscape and this new culture. And each month would feature my drawings and writings and a kind of different approach, sometimes a complete narrative, sometimes a pastiche. And it was really, really wonderful to have a recurring external deadline every month and to have a mandate to draw and to have a specific audience in mind. But it was also all encompassing. It took every moment that I had. But folks, the subscribers really loved it. And this was how I was supporting myself at this point. So I wanted to do something the next year. And so the next year I continued the subscription, but sent folks whatever I was working on. And it was really an exploratory year. And so sometimes people got simple paintings or more sculptural things. Sometimes I would design something and have it produced. There were always stickers. I love stickers. But I realized I'd gone from creating these large public rituals to these small, intimate rituals. People wrote me all the time about how they carved out space in their schedule to open their brown paper package and how they really looked forward to that time. And so in 2023, every month folks got a home ritual kit. And so they'd get an instruction sheet, and there are tiers of subscribers. So the first tier, they would just get the ritual description with household substitution suggestions. And if you were on a higher tier, you would get some of the objects that were necessary for the ritual. And I really started through this experimenting with working with clay, because my good friend who made this cup and my partner's dad, Nick Troisi, he was giving me access to his kiln. He was very supportive as a fellow artist. And he made this cup that during the pandemic offered me a surprising kind of comfort. And I just was struck by that like everything was terrible. It seemed like every new thing was more terrible than the thing before that. But holding this cup that fit perfectly in my hands and felt warm, like somatically and psychically offered me a little respite. And I am really interested in that as an object maker and want to explore the possibility of objects potentially doing that. So when it did become safe for us to gather again, the next show that I had involved a live event that was a way for us, for 8 people at a time, to kind of process some of the grief that we held during the pandemic individually, but hadn't really had any kind of collective catharsis about. And it started out, we sat around this table, we put on headphones. It was sort of like a mahjong game, a meditation, and a seance maybe. And my voice was on the headsets, kind of guiding through like my experiences and other experiences that I read about. And if any of them resonated with you, you would flip over the tile. And the tiles themselves were glossy on the top and a little more textured on the bottom and burnished on the sides. And they just have a kind of rightness about their weight and the way they sound as they're getting passed around. And folks, it was a way for you to kind of rearrange the story of your pandemic experience. And each event ended in a moment where we celebrated each participant's imminent joy. We raised a glass to the imminent joy that each of us should have coming our way. And this last image is of Stowe Len, who's a really wonderful artist and does a lot of work on and about water. And we collaborated on this project called The 12th Star that took place in the Susquehanna River Valley, where I live, and was funded by a MAP Fund grant. And I haven't talked about it much, so I don't know how articulate I'll be about it, but we basically created this ritual that we hoped would let folks reflect on their own losses, and then by making marks on this surface to acknowledge those losses, using these white flags to erase those marks and transform those flags of surrender into more kind of fiery symbols of resilience, and then process back upstream, and then our little regatta would take the flags back up the Susquehanna. And that kind of brings us up to like this moment. This show is up right now at Open Source Gallery in Tampa. And you may recognize these images from Georgia's Lovely Variety. I blew up those black and white drawings as cobalt and white archival digital prints. And my hope for this show, I'm experimenting with this with 2 narrative voices. So I'm hoping that the show's called You Can't Hear It, But We're Cheering for you. And I'm hoping that the prints are the voice of the you that needs to be cheered for. And then the sculptural objects are the voice of the beings doing the cheering. And that the viewer can simultaneously connect with both voices. Okay, I have 9 minutes left, which is amazing. So I've never talked about this work before, or my role in this work before, but for the last 20 plus years, whenever this activist artist collective called the Yes Men needed some prop for their work, I would help them out. And in recent years, my partner, who is kind of the driving force of this collective now, he's become much more involved. And so I've become much more involved. And I also finally have a skill set that has become more useful to them. So they recently did a project where, and if you don't know the Yes Men, definitely look them up. But to summarize, they kind of will take on a corporate identity, either through a website or they'll get invited to a conference because they had a website, and they present themselves as a company, and the Yes Men kind of restore that company, their identity. They correct that company's identity to be what we want them to be. And so I know that's hard to piece together, but in this case, they took on the identity of Mattel and announced that Mattel, on the heels of all of the success of Barbie and all of this new plastic that was going to be in the landfills because of the success of the Barbie movie, Mattel was going to launch a line of Barbies made of mushrooms so that they would biodegrade. And Daryl Hannah got involved, an actress, as the spokesperson, and they made an official announcement, and they're so thorough with their press releases that some newspapers believed it and published it, and then other newspapers wrote about them believing it. And so it really got some traction, and then the Yes Men reveals it wasn't Mattel, it's us. And the whole premise or the whole point is to put Mattel in under the spotlight of having to answer, well, why aren't you thinking about making your dolls biodegradable? So this video is part of the kind of announcement, and my role in it was I art directed the design of the dolls, the graphics. I got to shop for all the clothes and braid Greta's hair and be present at the photo shoots. But the film itself and the concepts and the direction is all by the Yes Men, and they're spectacular. And I'm just going to show you this.
Made of mushrooms, she's the best. Eco warrior Barbie, putting bad guys to the test. Eco warrior Barbie.
Do you have the bolt cutters? Yeah.
She's the one who takes control.
We're almost there. Lockdown. Rest. I'm too late. I'll file a lawsuit.
When adults are wrong, she'll do what's right.
That was a perfectly good bucket of poo.
She'll go anywhere, even France.
Daryl, Julia,
Phoebe,
Greta.
not afraid to serve the cause. Eco warrior Barbie, corporate criminal sabotage. Eco warrior Barbie.
Pussy Riot masks sold separately.
Thank you guys so much.